What is up guys, TopTierYugioh here, and today I want to share the Brave Tenyi deck that I took to YCS Charlotte. I also played this deck at a regional, and so a lot of theory and testing has gone into this list, and it's evolved massively to get to this point. But now, is this the final form? Maybe not, but we're getting there. And I want to show you guys exactly where I'm at, so let's go ahead and get into it. Getting into the list, obviously this is a synchro deck, and with that the best normal summon tuner is 3 copies of Red Rose Dragon, along with that 1 copy of Rox Rose Dragon, and then 1 Basil Rose Shoot. These cards are just absolutely broken. Red Rose is 3 tuners on board with just 1 normal summon. Red Rose combos very well with any of your Tenyi monsters and the Adventure Engine, and so drawing it with any special summon pretty much is full combo. Moving on to the largest engine in the deck, what really carries most of your games is your Tenyis, and so with that we play 3 copies of Ashina, 3 copies of Arara, 3 copies of Ishura, 1 copy of Stana, and then 3 copies of Vessel. So you want to max out in Brave Tenyi on all of your main special summon Tenyi monsters, your Ashina, which gets you other Tenyis out of your deck, Arara, which gets them back from Banish Zone, and then Vishuddha, which is great for answering opponents' boards. The one card that I think isn't in most lists is the Stana, but I really like it because 1, it's a level 4 non-tuner that you can summon off of Ashina. That comes up a lot, but also the effect itself is very useful for protecting your non-effect monsters, and usually the normal monsters. And so in a lot of cases what you can do is just like summon Stana, go into a monk, and then monk attack into something. Because the monk's destroyed by battle, you can use Stana to destroy that monster, bring back the monk, and then special summon another monster or summon a tuner, and then go off in the Halcon. So that can be a way to clear boards to make your plays in main phase 2. Also, just in general, protection is nice. And then 3 copies of Vessel, which is obviously an insane card, but I do think it's a little bit overrated. I lost so many games throughout the YCS and the regional just like working on Vessel, like opening multiples or opening this with a hand of non-Tenyi monsters or no way of getting a non-effect monster on board, or just in a simplified game state drawing into Vessel to where all it does is dump a worm, and then none of the worms you send to graveyard do anything without something else on board. Vessel is definitely powerful, but I do think it is a little bit overrated. But nonetheless, I do think you have to play it at least 2 copies, 2 to 3. At first I was doing 2, now I'm kind of on 3. And now to go with our Tenyi cards, the other worms we play are 1 copy of Moyi, 1 copy of Taya, and then not a worm, but the 1 copy of Blackout to round out the Sword Soul engine. These all go without saying, I would say, but the only thing that I think is noteworthy is that I'm not playing Long Young, and I was playing this in the previous 2 versions of this build. Like again, I played this at a regional before the YCS, and I also played it like a week before at a locals. And I've been playing Long Young for most of it, but I opted to take it out because I felt that Long Young, it really only leads you towards level 10 synchro boards, but I felt that the level 10 synchros, like you're already going to have a Baron, so having an extra Qixing Long Young or Chen Yang, I felt that it wasn't as impactful. Qixing Long Young is definitely a really good card, but I felt that a lot of other players were also on droplets and other board breakers, and so I felt that I really would have preferred to go for the Blackout plays. And so really the way it works is like with your Qixao, you're either going to search Long Young or Blackout. I felt that Blackout was the one that was a little bit more important, so I opted to play those combos instead. And if I'm doing that, I don't necessarily need the Long Young because drawing it doesn't really do anything. Like Long Young plus Tenyi sure gets you to a level 10 synchro, but that's kind of it. Like it doesn't really lead to an engine play, and so that's why I decided to cut it. And then the other thing that comes up with going for the Blackout play is that it gives you a better follow-up because all of your Tenyis in graveyard require a non-effect monster on board to activate, and so that's either going to be a token or it's going to be your monk. And Blackout's graveyard effect, or not graveyard effect, but the effect that triggers when banished, can also help you get a token on board, which can then allow you to use all of your Tenyi cards again. So it does lead for better follow-up, it's a better engine play, and again, that's why, one of the many reasons I cut Long Young and really emphasize Blackout in a lot of the deck and in the combos. After that, we've got our Adventure Engine. You can't be playing Brave Tenyi without Brave cards, and so you got 3 copies of Right, 3 copies of Enchantress, 2 copies of Fateful Adventure, 2 copies of Griffin Rider, and then 1 Draco back and Foolish. More than any other deck this format, I feel like Brave Tenyi is the one deck that actually like depends on the Brave cards. Like these in this deck are more than just extra monster fodder. They are more than just a free negation that you put on board to protect your plays like they are in Prank Kids. But in this deck, they actually are necessary to your Tenyi cards actually functioning, because once again, you need non-effect monsters on board, and the Brave engine is the best way to generate tokens, which are non-effect monsters. And so I really wanted to max out on all of these cards, and while Griffin Rider does not give you tokens, it is a level 7 monster which does work well with Red Rose Dragon. The entire adventure engine was incredible for me. I never felt like I was playing too many cards, and for a while I was only playing one Fateful and then one Griffin Rider. I decided to bump them up to both 2, bump them both up to 2 the night before the YCS, and it was a great decision in my opinion. I definitely liked it a lot, and there were so many games to where you're just grinding with a Fateful Adventure. Just like Fateful, add Enchantress, discard Enchantress, banish it, search right, summon token, and then activate your Tenyi cards. Next turn, do the exact same thing. So it was just a great engine all around to have in the deck, and seeing them more often allowed me to grind with other decks in the format, because it really feels that this format, with all of the hand traps, like all of the decks have high ceilings right now. Every single deck in the format that is viable can do things, but with all of the hand traps, they end up simplifying the game state to where every single match you end up grinding pretty much, and in those grind games you need some type of advantage engine, and in this deck it is the adventure engine more so than some other decks that are only playing one Fateful, one Griffin, and not really emphasizing these cards as much. And the other decks are going to be grinding with like DPE. And the tricky thing in these grind matchups, which again happen very frequently, is that both engines have ways to out each other. And so like DPE, for example, like if your opponent's on Enforcer, they can just out your Fateful Adventure, and now you have no more advantage engine for the rest of the game until you get to another right, which is why playing the second Fateful comes up so much, because your opponent's going to destroy your one Fateful, then you just have Enchantress in graveyard, so you search another right, you get to another Fateful, and then you can go from there. But the other thing is, so they can out our adventure engine, but we also have Draco back, which can out the DPE. And so one thing that's key in this deck in those matchups is to save your Draco back, and so there are a lot of games to where you're not like searching this, discarding and attaching it to a token, because you're synchroing the token away anyways, so you're just going to lose your Draco back. But instead, you're searching Draco back, sometimes using it to chain block, like the Fateful effect to search it to chain block, and then you're holding it for when you can answer that DPE, and so waiting for the opponent to not use the effect destroying itself, or you might be using it to prompt them to use the effect to clear it off of the board, so that then you can get to your main combo. And so Draco back is actually a really important card in this deck for dealing with DPE and dealing with just other decks in general. And so while it is like a free discard in a lot of cases, I find it to be usually incorrect to do that, unless you're just gonna hard win the game. Like in that case, you know, go for it. But if you're not about to win the game, I'm usually holding the Draco back, and that worked out really well for me. Another trick that I kind of picked up with Draco back is that you can also use it to chain block. So let's say, for example, you're trying to go into Halki Fibrax, which is one of the main plays this deck does. Like you got to go into Hulk. If you're not summoning Hulk, you're not winning that game. However, Hulk is very vulnerable to hand traps. It does lose to cards like Ash, Valor, and of course all of the other hand traps, but Ash and Valor are the big ones, to where chain blocking can become very important, and the adventure engine is a way to protect your plays. And so you can use both of these cards to chain block. And so let's say, for example, you have Fateful Adventure up, and then you have Token and Otera. You can go into Needle Fiber, and then have Needle Fiber Chainlink 1, Fateful Chainlink 2, so now they can't Ash or Ogre your Needle Fiber, it resolves, and then your combo goes through. And then what you can do with Draco back, like if you only have Draco back in hand, or if let's say you use Fateful to chain block something else, and you're still going for a Needle Fiber, maybe you have Griffin, Token, Tuner, and you have Fateful. What you can do is, let's say, equip the Draco back to one of the monsters that you're going to use for the Needle Fiber. So let's say you equip it to Otera, and then you can go Otera, Griffin into, where'd my Needle Fiber go? Into Needle Fiber. Of course, this is an equip card, so it falls off, and then the effect will trigger. So you can have Chainlink 1, Halki Fibrax, Chainlink 2, Draco back equipping to the token. So it gives you multiple ways to chain block. There's just so much you can do with these adventure cards. They're just actually broken. These are incredible cards. There's a reason why they're in every single deck right now. So we are playing a lot of adventure cards. Now moving into the other section of the deck, one of the another big chunk of it is the hand traps. And so for hand traps, we are playing 3 copies of Nib, 3 copies of Ash, 3 copies of Ogre, 3 copies of Veiler, 3 copies of Bell, and then 2 Ghost Mourners. So we are playing a total of 17 hand traps in this deck, which is a lot. However, the main deck is 55 cards, and this does give us like a 49.5% chance of opening more than one hand trap. And so while it is slightly less than that golden ratio of having a greater than 50% chance of opening multiple hand traps, I conceded to the fact that to win and to top a YCS, you do have to get a little bit lucky. This is very close to that threshold. If I'm going to do well, I'm just going to get a little bit lucky, and I did not get that lucky. I mean, in this regard, I did open a good amount of hand traps in most of my games. Like, I never felt that I wanted more hand traps than I already had. But so this ratio was good. I just didn't get lucky in general. I do think that these were the best hand traps that I could have probably played for this event. Nib is just broken. Everybody's on combo decks. Nib is the best anti-combo hand trap. The only downside is that if you're playing against any adventure cards, if you're playing against the mirror match, if you're playing against most other decks, once they activate that right, you know that you need multiple hand traps in order to actually use Nib, and that's where all of these come into handy. And they're all just strong individually as well. I think the ones that are probably the most questionable are the Bells and the Mourners. I was on 2 Bell, 2 Mourner for a while, but then opted to go for the 3rd Bell, because again, I added some adventure cards, I added Stana last minute, and then to keep the ratio of hand traps consistent, I need to add in 1 more hand trap, and I went with the 3rd Bell. I thought about a 3rd Mourner, but I thought that Bell might be better because it can negate, it can negate Enchantress, it can negate DPE, it can negate Scythe, and those are just really the main format shifting cards. And while Mourner can negate Token Collector, as well as Scythe sometimes, and random cards in just every matchup, I mean, it's a very dynamic card. The burn is relevant too, like in the prank matchup. Like if you're in time against prank kids, the max life point differential that they can create through effects is 1500 through the 1000 life point gain, the 500 life point burn. If they summon Doodle, which they will, you can use Doodle or Moonlight Chill on Doodle to keep them from searching. But also, if that Doodle leaves the field, they take 2000, which is greater than the 1500 that they can maximally deal. And sometimes that just is game, because they're forced to stop their plays or take that damage, which they cannot outdeal during their turn. If they started with a drop season, gained 1000, then all you would have to do is go for a Long Young if you played it. I didn't, but you could in theory just go for a Long Young, deal 1200, and that's game. So yeah, Collector was good. It performed very well for me. But again, I opted to go for the 3rd Bell. I just felt that it was more versatile and just hit more things that were more relevant. Some other hand traps that I considered were Cherries and Token Collector. I played Token Collector for the regional actually, but opted to cut it from the main deck just because it just was not coming up enough for me. And I felt that in games where it did come up, it kind of hurt me. I don't want to say more than it hurt my opponents, but like, you gotta summon tokens in this deck. And so you have to have a way to clear your own Token Collector as well as summon more. Like, it's rough. And then Cherries, I really wanted to play, but I kind of chickened out last minute. I think moving forward, I will play it with DPE because it just re-emphasized, like the YCS re-emphasized to me kind of what I felt after the regional, which was that this format, again, because of all of the hand traps, reduces to very simplified game states, and in those game states, you need some type of advantage engine. And in this deck, we have the adventure stuff, but in other decks, they have DPE, and if you can just cherries the DPE out of their deck, usually you start winning those matchups a lot easier. And that's not to say that this deck loses to Enforcer, it's just that in grind games, it's hard for this deck to deal with a pop every single turn and a Pot of Greed at some point as well. So Cherries is a pretty good option. I'm going to reevaluate how many cards I want in this deck, and then kind of see from there how many cards I should play, and then what hand traps will fit into that. And now with the branded cards coming out like yesterday, Bell is really good because it negates branded in red, which is a very, very good card. But we'll see. I definitely have a lot more testing to do with this deck. After that, I played 3 copies of Small World. This card was absolutely incredible because it is 3 more copies of literally any other monster in the deck, and this deck runs on monsters. So I absolutely loved Small World. It's so easy to bridge between any of the cards in your deck, and because we play so many hand traps, they all search you to the best cards in the deck. And so let's just take a look at a few of them. So all of the Ghost Girls, for example, they all have 1800 defense, and so and they're level 3. That's 2 important bridges. So being level 3 bridges from Temple into Red Rose, because they all are level 3 monsters, and they all have different stats from the Water Enchantress, which is different stats from the Red Rose. So that works very, very well. But if, let's say, you wanted to get from a hand trap to a Tenyi monster, you can do that as well, because these are all like weird attributes. Like, they all match other attributes in the deck, like light, wind, earth. They all match with Tenyis for the most part. And then, well, not all of them. We're not playing all the attribute Tenyis, but they do match sometimes. If not, you can also bridge them through Moyi, which has 1800 defense. And then you could also bridge that to any of your Tenyis, because Moyi is also Worm. If you wanted to get from these to a Water Enchantress, you could also use Moyi, because they're both water. And then if you wanted to go backwards, the same bridges work. And so you can really search for any single monster in your entire deck using any other monster. The only one that I don't have a bridge for is going from Nib to Red Rose. That is like the one limitation, but outside of that, you can bridge from any monster to any other monster. It's just about finding the bridge. And even in the side deck, I play other cards to take advantage of Small World as well, because it's just such a powerful card. It's just so useful. And so, like, there were games to where I would open up with combo plus Veiler plus some random extra Tenyi. I could combo, then Small World the extra Tenyi into a Nib and have Nib Veiler on top of my normal combo too. So that was absolutely incredible. Or just Small Worlding into other worms in hand to trigger Moyes later to get that extra draw, versus having to go for Taya. Small World was just nuts. There's so much I can say about it, but I don't want to keep going on and on about Small World. And then finally we played one copy of Despot and then one copy of Fairy Tale Snow. And so with the other engine requirements in the deck, we have 5 of them. And again, I don't want to call Draco back an engine requirement. It's actually not horrible to draw. It's a really good card. So, like, sometimes your Fateful will get ogred and you have the Draco back anyways and you punish. Same with Blackout. Blackout's, you know, not horrible to draw. Instead of searching that, you can search an extra Tenyi or an extra, not Tenyi, but instead of searching the Blackout, you can search an extra Sword Soul monster to help you follow up on the next turn, which again is very important in this deck. And so I don't want to call these bricks, but these are, you know, I mean, you can justify all of them. Like, you can still combo with Despot in your hand. You can discard this off of a Fateful and it's really good. This plus Adara is really good. I mean, it's Needle, I guess. And then this, you can dump a Rose Dragon with Riser, revive it with Basil, and then combo even further. Like, all of these cards are not optimal to draw, and then if you do draw them, it's not like the end of the world. You can play around it. You can do things with them. They all do. These are all good cards. However, I do think it is a lot of suboptimal cards to draw in this deck. So I don't want to call the deck bricky. It's not. You can play with every hand, but you guys get what I'm saying. Let's move on to the extra deck. For the extra deck, we're going to start with our Link monsters. We've got 2 copies of Monk, 2 copies of Halki Fibrax, and then 1 copy of Auroradon. This is pretty standard. I do think you could cut a Monk. The second one didn't come up for me at the YCS, but the second did come up at the regional. It's just sort of like a fringe card that does come up every now and then, but it does come up sometimes. I do think you do need the second Halki Fibrax though. That comes up, I don't want to say every game, but definitely a significant amount, because the first may or may not get stopped. You need that follow-up play. Even if the first one goes through, a lot of times you have 2 really strong pushes. The first will be like your Needle Fiber play, or obviously Needle Fiber play, but your Despot play. So you might go Despot, Auroradon, and then have full combo from there. But then on the following turn, you might like Fateful, get an Enchantress, get a token, and then go for a second Halki Fibrax with leaving the token on board. This summons Rose Dragon plus token is Yazi. That gets you a whole bunch of other stuff, and then you go from there. So you really end up with 2 initial pushes, and vice versa as well. And so you might Halki Fibrax in the Rose Dragon to combo with Token Griffin, and that would end on whatever board you wanted to end on. But then your second push might be the Despot and the Auroradon play. And so playing the 2 Halki Fibrax definitely comes up. But that is it for the Link monsters. After that, we play some Synchros, amongst which the Baron, Shishao, Riser, Yazi. We'll stop there for now. I think these are like the main core 4 Synchros that you need. I think these are the ones that come up again in pretty much every single combo. And then the way I was playing the deck and the way I built it specifically was, again, I was focusing on Snow and Blackout plays versus going for level 10 Synchro monsters. And so Riser Dragon became incredibly important because I felt that Riser was the one card that it could get you to more interruptions through sending Snow, but it also can get you to more engine through sending Enchantress if you don't already have it, or sending other Tenyi cards. And so I felt that Riser Dragon was actually very important, and I wanted my combos to revolve around it, and the deck sort of reflects that. And then Yazi is obviously necessary for all of the combos. So those are the main cards that you have to play. They just come up all the time. After that, you have some more flexible choices, and for those, I am playing Chao Feng, Chen Ying, Draco Berserker, Yazi. These next four come up every now and then in certain combos, and so there's a board I really like where you on Chao Feng Blackout, to where you can use Blackout to destroy the Chao Feng, then Chao Feng starts as a hand trap, and that gives you other disruption. And again, because this is an interactive combo deck, it's very important to have interruptions in different zones of the game, zones being field, hand, graveyard, deck, etc. And so being able to not lose to like Droplets or Dark Ruler, or just your opponent not being able to play around things as well. So if you have Blackout Chao Feng, your opponent can play around the Blackout, but which hand trap are you searching? What are they playing around there? You can search something that they can play around less. And so that gives you a lot of flexibility and versatility. Chen Ying is really good. It's just beefy. Like, you banish so many cards in this deck, especially with the Snow. Snow can trigger the effect as well, but this can just be like a 4,000, 5,000 attack monster that they can't destroy. It's kind of nuts. Draco Berserker and Baxia both come up when you're following up. Those are very important. And then the final two cards in the extra deck are one copy of Formula Synchron and then the second copy of Yazi. Formula never came up for me at all. I think I actually might cut it. Or it did come up at the regional, but it wasn't, it wasn't incredible. Because most of your combos, you're not ending on Needle Fiber, which means that you're not using the effect to summon Formula that often. And then even when you do, you're going to have the option between Formula and Riser. And so would I rather draw one card or send a specific card to the graveyard? A lot of cases I like the Riser, and so honestly I might even play a second copy of Riser cutting the Formula, because that came up for me a little bit more often. I would have preferred that. And then the second Yazi comes up again very frequently when you're grinding, and again you're grinding with that Fateful Adventure. You draw a hand trap for turn, summon hand trap, go Yazi, Yazi pop something, get back into another Tenyi or into a Sword Soul, and you're back into the game. And so the second Yazi comes up a lot when you're just grinding. Also, non-targeting beater, pretty good. Again, one thing I do think I'll change with this is potentially adding cherries to the main deck or the side, and then adding in a DPE. Another option would be Meow. Could cut the Formula, don't really need that. Some other options that you could play though would be Black Rose Dragon, because it's pretty easy to synchro in the opponent's turn with the Riser Dragon. You can definitely set up combos that way. And then this could be a really good interruption, like Riser and the Black Rose. I don't want to say GG, but that's pretty good. Another card is Cypher Lord Omega, because just there are game states where you're locked into Worms, or sorry, not when you're locked into Worms, where you just need a generic level 8 synchro, and Draco Berserker is the only generic level 8 synchro in the deck, and sometimes I would like to have a different level 8 synchro. So Omega is really good. It can also just replenish your graveyard, give you info in the opponent's hand, disrupt opposing DPEs, just a good card in general. Again, Teaching Long Young, mentioned it earlier, just a good card, but ultimately did not make my final list. And then finally, you will notice that I did not play Herald of the Arclight in this deck. And the reason I didn't play Herald is that I felt that the only time it comes up is if you're resolving the Auroradon combo, or the Despot combo, while you also have an Ashna in graveyard. But in every single one of those situations, and that is only one situation, I felt that Riser Dragon was actually a better play. And so I'm going to make a combo video, but most of your combos end on 3 to 4 disruptions, depending on whether or not you're starting with a Baron. So like Baron is usually made outside of the combos. It's just going to be like Ashna plus the Red Rose, and then you go into the Hulk. But the Hulk play itself is 3 disruptions, and with Ashna 3 disruptions. And so what most people think about with this deck is they're going to have Chi-Shao, Blackout, Herald. But you have other options. So if you go Riser instead, you can have Snow, Chi-Shao, Blackout. You could also have Snow, Chao Feng, Blackout. Or you can have Chi-Shao, Chao Feng, Blackout. So you're going to end up with 3 disruptions, like in any case. But I just felt that Herald was the weakest link of those disruptions. And again, those options being like Blackout, Chao Feng, Snow, which is sent off Riser, and then Herald. Like, of those 4, it definitely feels that Herald is the weakest. And while the effect keeps you from getting dropleted, while the, it isn't omni negate, it is very good, the downside is the attack. The attack is, or not the attack, but the defense. The defense is far too low. A situation that came up a lot in testing was when you're playing against prank kids and you've got Herald, Chixiao, Blackout. What happens is normal summon Lampsies. This is the only card on their field, so you can't Blackout. Attack over the Herald. That just dealt with, that card alone just dealt with one of your disruptions, and there's nothing you can do about it. And after that, they can continue to just play their cards. Like, they can activate Right, and then Right just trades into the board so easily. It's just nuts. Like, I did not like Herald. It's just way too easy to attack over in pretty much every single matchup. Or even in the mirror match, it's so easy to clear Herald, Chixiao, Blackout. Summon Vishuda, attack over the Herald, go into Monk, Vishuda effect, bounce Chixiao, and then summon your tuner, and then that's just game. Whereas against that same board, if you had Snow instead, because you go into Riser Dragon instead of the Herald, it summon Vishuda, activate Snow, flip it face down. Now you don't have to worry about that. Or if you're playing against prank kids, summon Kid, try to attack, Snow it face down. You don't have to worry about that, and the Kid's face down now. I played Herald at the regional and it just really underperformed. I really do not think Herald is good right now. Moving on to the side deck, I played 3 copies of Droll, 3 copies of Twin Twister, and then 1 copy of Godarla. I really wanted to play a card that I could search with the Small World to out-establish boards, and so Godarla was really good for that. Some other options I thought about playing were Lava Golem, Santa Claus, and then Gameciel. Gameciel is probably the best, or not the best, but it's the easiest to search with the Small World because it's water, so you can get to it through Enchantress, and Enchantress bridges to all of the hand traps, it bridges to Red Rose, it bridges to all of your other level 3 monsters, whereas the other cards are a little bit more tricky. So like Santa Claus bridges easily because it's light and you have a lot of other light monsters. Lava Golem bridges because it's 2500 defense, and I guess the same with Santa Claus, they're both 2500 defense, but this bridges through Vishuda, which has 2500 defense. It's also a worm and it's a dark, so that goes to a lot of places. And Godarla is honestly like the hardest card to bridge because it is wind with awkward stats, and so you have to go to it through Griffin or through Ghost Bell. Now the reason I opted to play it was because it is wind, and so I was very worried about the Flunder matchup, and especially after I found out that a large chunk of the player pool was playing Flunder. I think I heard it was close to a third. Like, there were a couple hundred Flunder players at the YCS, and that definitely solidified my choice to play Godarla. Also at that regional, I was getting mopped by Flunder. Like, I lost twice to Flunder in a row, 2-0'd, mopped. And so I definitely wanted to be more prepared for Flunder for the YCS. Unfortunately, I did not play a single Flunder player, but these were the cards that went in that matchup. Droll is just really good if they don't have Shifter. Twin Twisters for dealing with, you can hit both the map and the trap, and that's why I went with this over Cosmic Cyclone. And while this deck does not want to discard, again, you do not really want to simplify the game state with this deck. I mean, you kind of have to with the hand traps, but you don't want to do it any more than that. But I felt that Twin Twisters was a necessity because it can hit both map and trap. And if you hit those, your opponent ain't doing nothing on your turn. I felt they would also come up if I played against Pure Outlich, like the trap Pure Outlich. And so I definitely liked Twin in that regard. However, I also did not play a Pure Outlich. But that is it for these cards in the side deck. Droll was good though. Droll actually came up. But after that, we played 3 copies of Triple Tactics Talents. I went for this because I obviously there are a lot of hand traps in the format, and it felt that this was going to be my solution to it because, again, I think this deck does well in very complex game states. You give this deck more cards, it can do a lot of things, probably more than any other deck in the format. Like if we have 10 card hands, I would trust this deck to do a lot more than the Prank Kid deck, or a lot more than the Flunder deck. Like this deck does a lot of things. And I'd say the only decks that maybe are better at it than in a complex game state will probably be Based. Yeah, like I think just Based would be better than this in the complex game state because they just have so many options. But I really just wanted to give myself more cards, and that was a big theory in this deck. I definitely liked it over a card like Crossout for that very same reason, because Crossout, like, they both respond to the same situation of your opponent activating a hand trap. However, Crossout takes a card away from both players. You lose the Crossout, they lose the hand trap. Whereas this, like, they hand trap you, but we draw more cards, so we +1 on that interaction. And now I think where I went wrong in this line of thought was that while this deck can play well in complex game states, while we want more cards, the cards that we draw are not necessarily all extenders. And what I mean by that is if you have monsters on board and you draw into Tenyis, you can't summon your Tenyis. If you've already normal summoned, you can't summon those hand traps. You can't summon the tuner that you just drew. And so there are very specific cards that we have to draw off of the triple attack. Otherwise, you're kind of forced to take cards out of your opponent's hand, which would be effectively the exact same thing as crossout. And so I think moving forward, the crossout might just be the better move. Also considering that because we are playing so many cards that are in other decks, such as the Adventure Engine, being able to negate a right is really nice. There are just a lot of other random cards that you can negate with crossout. And so being more versatile might be the play. And again, while theoretically I do not want to play more cards that simplify game states, it might be just a better way of answering all of the hand traps that are being played right now. After that, I played 2 copies of Magical Spring. Again, once again, leaning into giving this deck more cards. The theory behind this card is that it was something that could be used to out the Scythe block, because once you use this, your opponent's spell or traps cannot be destroyed, meaning that their DPE cannot destroy their set Scythe, meaning no Scythe. And so that's actually very powerful in that matchup. But also in matchups where you're playing against adventure cards, especially against prank kids, I felt that there's a lot of face-up spell and traps. And so you can easily just give yourself more cards. Like, if you're playing against an adventure pranks deck, right, they could end on a board of place, pranks, Draco back on token, and then maybe Fateful Adventure. That's 4. Maybe not the Draco back, okay, that's a little bit of a stretch, but place, pranks, fateful is definitely viable. If they activate Pandemonium, that's 4. You chain this to Pandemonium, you draw 4 cards, discard 1. Draw 4, discard 1 is insane. Like, you just win. So this is a win button in those scenarios. I didn't actually draw it, so it didn't really come up at the YCS, but in theory, in testing, it's actually really, really good. Better in those matchups, and that matchup in particular, than anything else. It's also decent against Flunder, so helping you draw into that Gemasio, helping you draw into, like, just more cards to break their board is pretty solid. Against the Scythe block, I did not like it that much. In theory, it works, but in actuality, you're, like, unless they have Fateful Adventure on board against PK, or, you know, yeah, usually it's going to be Fateful. Unless they have a Faceless Spell or Trap, this is just, like... This is literally a -2 because you don't draw any cards if they don't have any cards face up, and Scythe is set, and then you still have to discard because Magical Spring is faceable on your side of the field. So you draw 0, discard 1, but you're not Scythe locked, and that's, you know, okay, you're not Scythe locked, but in that same situation, it would be fine to just be a Cosmic Cyclone, or it would be fine to be sometimes a Ghost Bell or a Ghost Mourner. Just, there are other cards to answer Scythe in that way. But I guess what I thought initially was that this could also be used in, like, the Prank Kids matchup. Another card that's very similar that I considered was Phantasme. I actually played this at the regional, and it was actually really, really good. I definitely enjoyed it, but I decided to cut it for the YCS because I didn't think it would come up as much as it did at the regional. But same premise. Then the final card that I played in the side deck was 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. This was actually really, really good because there are a lot of decks that rely on spell cards, and just even in adventure mirror matches, it's nice to get ahead of your opponent on this because you can activate your spells, your Fateful Adventure and all of that stuff, and get those on the board, activate this on your opponent. Now they have to set theirs first, and you can keep bouncing it back in the hand with Vishuda, Draco backs, all that stuff, and so it's very easy to get ahead with this card. However, I do think that I will maybe cut it from the side deck because it feels like with this card in a lot of the matchups, you can also just lose to monsters, and while you're stopping your opponent's spells, they can just, again, beat you with monsters. Like, 2 monsters is DPE, and DPE clears this, and then they keep playing. So it was almost that, like, this is a floodgate, yes, but you cannot only have this floodgate. It's just not enough. And so because of that, I think I would rather play cards that are enough. But once again, this is the entire side deck. The main decks that I was worried about going into the YCS were Floanderies and then Prank Kids. Prank Kids is probably the best deck in the format. It's probably going to be the most represented deck both in the in the main event and in Top Cut, so I definitely wanted to have cards that were good against Prank Kids. I think the Twin Twisters is great in that matchup. Having a Kaiju is good as well, and then again, Magical Springs is solid. They play a bunch of hand traps. Triple Attack is also good. Obviously, not all of those go in, but it's nice to have cards that are good in those matchups. And then against Flawanda Rees, which is the scariest matchup for me after getting mopped up at that regional, I really liked the Drolls, Twins, and Godarla. And now, if you want to learn more about those two decks, because I do think it's important to analyze both those matchups, if you're going to play Brave Tenyi, check out the decks that are going to be on your screen right now. We're going to have Bruce's YCS Flawanda Rees deck, shoutouts to Bruce, and also we are going to have Trevor's second place regional Prank Kids deck profile. Shoutouts to Trevor as well. Both of those guys, I'm so happy that they did well at these events. And they were both nice enough to do profiles for the channel as well. So shoutouts to those guys. Check those videos out. And